It's elongated over time. It can be immediate depending on the temperament of the child.
Right.
Some children are just they have a little more fire, so they're more reactive. Some are passive, and
Right.
usually with the passive children, it comes out covertly,
Mm,
and it comes out later in relationships, and it
mm,
comes out later, like you said, in at work and different places like that.
right.
But for the most part, it is a continual jabbing, like
Like
you said.
like think when you read the statistics, how many women, how many men were they raised in single parent homes by their mother, and because their mother is unhappy, uh, uh, or I won't even use the mother. I use the father because the father is not actually in the home, or
Right,
the father's unhappy, and
right,
because the father's unhappy, they're unhappy. It reflects in their interaction and in their behavior, and now you have a son that is equally unhappy in how he treats, his children,
right.
or even his spouse,
Right,
you know.
right, right.
And
And it is important to remember because your child has a nervous system and you have a nervous system, and what you mentioned was if the father's not happy, then he's coming into the home with an angry disposition or
right,
irritable or even depressed because
right,
depression one of the signs of depression is irritability and
right,
anger. So when you are the father, you are projecting, you still are creating. That's
right,
one of the powers of being a father is
right.
that you are creating. God has given you the power to create. So in that provoking your child to wrath, you are creating a little hell's angel.
Now I remember the movie, the Cabin. In that movie, The Cabin, his father would beat him, and he ended up killing his father.
The
Uh,
shack?
the Shack. Thank you. I'm
Okay.
sorry, not The Cabin, The Shack. Um, but you see the impact from the father to the son,
Right.
and because the father wasn't happy, his father did the same thing to him. And
Right.
when he finally forgave his father, he
Right.
actually he got to see the full story, the full picture. And
Right.
so because the father was that was done to his father, and his father did it to
Right.
his son, and
Right.
then eventually he killed his father, he poisoned his father.
Right.
And so you see how it impacts. It go from one generation to another generation to another generation, of the wrath aspect of it, the
Right.
wrath, and it's a response. It
Right.
seems like provoking drives a response, and the
Right.
response, the Bible says, wrath.
Right. And I know for African Americans, people of color in poverty, there's a more like a likelihood that the fathers are stressed because of financial reasons, cultural issues, oppression, racism,
Right.
and just many of those things, or just the succession of not having a father yourself and now you're a father, or having a father in a home who wasn't able to
Right.
engage and to have those technical skills to rear the person, the child, in the ways of the Lord. So it's important to remember, like you said, this is familial, this is multi generational.
Mhm.
And if that's the tone of your family, then you get to check it and you get to assess it and you get to address it.
Right.
And after you address it, you get to make the decision about how you
To
want to
change
move
it.
forward. And that's our purpose today is just kind of to look at it.
Mhm.
And sometimes it's hard to look at because we've been so conditioned not to look at our parents'
Right.
behavior because it was disrespectful or it was a sign to show they didn't love us.
Right.
But in all actuality, what it's saying is we all have gaps.
Right. We all
We
have
all have
gaps.
gaps. From the day
We
of
all
Adam
have
until
gaps.
today, we all
Right.
have gaps. And we have to be able to um, address this issue. And God addressed it. God used Paul to address it. Fathers, provoke not your child to wrath.
Right.
And meaning that there is a almost as if
Mm.
in the home, if there was a red light, like a nuclear bomb
Right.
that went off, do not provoke your child to
Right.
wrath because it's letting you know danger, danger,
Right.
danger. But what happens is we sit back and we don't recognize that maybe some of the actions of our children is related to the fact
Mm.
that they were provoked in some way.
Mhm.
We almost feel like, I don't know whose child that is. I don't
Right.
know, little Johnny's beating up everybody at school.
Right.
He just has an anger issue. You
Right.
know, he's a bully, or he is verbally assaultive, because sometimes the wrath is verbally assaultive. You may
Mm.
never pick up a weapon
Mhm.
or throw anything or use your fist, but you might have a mouth that verbally
Mm.
abuses everyone in your atmosphere. And that's still a part of that conditioning of
Mhm.
wrath.
Right.
It's looking at, where did it come from?
Mhm.
What is the origin of my dissatisfaction? So we want to be very alerted to that. We know, again, that wrath is a strong, over a period of time of anger and emotion that is expelled into verbal communication or behavioral communication.
Right.
And it admonishes, it lets us know the outcome. It says,
Mm.
or your child is going to be discouraged.
Right.
In technical terms, from a psychological perspective, that means your child is going to be depressed. Now, one thing we need to know about depression is it looks differently in women and in boys. You know, usually girls, when they're depressed, they end up hating themselves.
Mm.
When boys are depressed, they may hate themselves, but they also may hate other people. And that is what creates that homicidal, suicidal
Gotcha.
spin,
Right.
right? Because
Right.
it's anger turned inside is depression, but anger turned outside is aggression.
Mm.
So it's looking at it from through those lenses, and knowing that when your spirit is broken,
Mhm.
the Bible talks about that, having a broken spirit, and
Mm.
to know that we have that much authority, men and fathers, you have that much power to break your children's heart
Right. Wow.
and to break their spirit and their hope. Because
Mm.
if you're discouraged, you lose motivation.
Mhm.
You know, you lose aspiration to do anything and to be anything, and you feel worthless and you don't see the light of day. So why not do drugs? Why not, not take care of myself? Because you have just been so discouraged
Mm.
and beaten down that you lose heart.
Mm.
You lose confidence in who you are.
Mhm.
And that's one particular thing that we have to be careful of. And that's what slave owners did. They used to beat the slaves
Mhm.
so that they would break their confidence
Mhm.
and break their aspirations to be free or to be
Wow.
well.
Wow. It's amazing what you just said. And when, especially when we don't quite understand the way God views a father and their responsibility. The
Mm-hmm.
father is not just, see, society, we've made it and we were comfortable with saying the father is the head, but that is not the viewpoint of God. The father is the foundation.
Right.
And the challenge is, if one father's foundation is broken, you can destroy your generation's foundation, another generation's foundation, because your foundation is broken and you're
Right.
upset and you're frustrated because
Right.
your foundation is broken. So you'll end up lashing out and breaking your son's foundation. You have the
Right.
capability of destroying their foundation
Right.
because they don't see what it is to be stable, or what it is to have consistency, or what it
Right.
is to really know what love is and concern and care and all these different things. So you will have a direct impact. Really, you'll have a direct impact on your grandkids or your
Right.
great grandkids' development,
Right.
because you are operating from a broken or exacerbated standpoint.
Right. And just as you mentioned, with how the wrath builds up, the discouragement, it's a part of the building up, because anger is protest.
Mm.
God put in us right and wrong, so we know how we're supposed to be loved.
Mm.
We know how we're supposed to be spoken to. Children know how they're supposed to be spoken to,
Right.
and they respond kindly to nice, kind voices
Right.
as
Right.
babies, and they cry when the voices are hard. And that's even before meeting or knowing gender differences.
Mm.
So they're very aware of what is fair, and anger is protest.
Mm.
So can you imagine being in protest for 18 years or 16 years or 15 years or how many ever years or even 1 year, because children don't have the capacity to endure stress the way we do. So
Mm.
if you look at it, that they're enduring the protest of anger, which is this is not right. This
Mm,
is wrong. This
mm,
is wrong. This is wrong. It teaches them that there is no equality anyways.
right.
There is no, there is no justice or judge that's going to rescue me. So if my behavior is not just, then who's going to judge me? Because I'm being treated poorly, I'm being abused, I'm being provoked, and no one's coming to my rescue.
Mm.
So it totally changes the landscape of justice and how we are
Mm.
supposed to treat people.
It's funny you said that. Was something that came to mind that I was listening to Jim Rome. He says, and he uses this form of the tools of last resort, and he was talking about criticism. And he says criticism is the same as giving a person a cut with a razor.
Mm-hmm.
And he says, look at the impact of criticism. If you raise a child, a father can have an impact on a child. If all they do is criticize, they're giving them series of cuts over and
And they
over and
become
over.
cutters.
And then he says that because they're being cut with razor blades,
Right.
look at how long it takes for them to actually be healed from those series of multiple cuts that are being given to them, because all they're doing is provoking because of that criticism, and it's constant criticism.
Right.
And so it's very interesting how you're saying, and sometimes we don't sit back and look at the full weight and impact of how we influence on this little brain, on this little
Right.
mind,
Right.
whether male or female. The
Right.
father can have an impact on
Right.
that developing brain.
Right.
And so because children, even though children are resilient, sometimes they may not be able to bounce back from those series of
Cuts.
cuts
Right.
that are given over and over again.
Right. And what I know about the brain and about pain is that the same region of the brain lights up if you're being hit or if you're being verbally assaulted.
Mm,
The same region of the and wherever there's pain, we have a pain region in our brain.
mm,
And so sometimes we feel like, I just said that word, but if you have a sensitive child, that could lighten up the pain signals in their brain, and it could literally cause those reactions of anger and of, this is protest, this is not right, this is not how I'm supposed to be treated. And when a child cries and doesn't get answered, they begin to try to self-soothe, and that's where we have the
mm.
alcohol use and the drug use and joining the gangs and all of those things. So there's so much that happens when a child cries, when there's an outcry for anger. And I'm
Mm,
going to be
mm,
honest, I wish I would have known this growing up. I had no clue. I just came into it as I became more aware of behavioral science. So
mm.
it's not saying, we're not sitting up here saying that we're perfect parents.
No, no, not at
We're
all.
just trying to
Not at
stop
all.
the next generation from
Right,
making some of the mistakes that we made,
right.
because there is manslaughter. This is a station identification. There is manslaughter, and then there's murder one.
Mm,
And I can stand by my husband and he can stand by me and say that we may have manslaughtered, meaning that we may have made accidents and hurt our children,
right.
but it was not murder.
Intentional.
It was
We're
not
not trying to,
planning.
right,
Like, I'm gonna show these kids,
right,
they think that they're gonna have a good night, but I'm gonna
right,
show them. It
right,
wasn't planned.
right.
So if you're planning to hurt your kids, and if you get fulfillment out of seeing your kids broken and bow down to you, then that is murder one.
Mm,
But if you're like us and you are learning how to talk to kids, learning how to punish children, how not to provoke
right.
your child to
Not
wrath,
punish, discipline.
right, discipline,
Yeah,
and that is what we know in justice as
right,
manslaughter. That
right.
wasn't your intent.
Mm-mm,
And so I
mm-mm.
just wanted to put that there. And moving back to the cry, learning to hear the cry of injustice, because all behavior is communication.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes we just think, oh, Johnny at school is acting out. I mentioned it earlier, but that's the cry of discouragement, and
Mm-hmm.
that's the cry of being provoked to wrath.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've seen it in just rebellion. I've seen it in statements like, I don't care.
Right,
When you hear a child says, I don't care, that means they have no hope for the justice system or things turning out.
right,
They
right,
have given up. They have hardened themselves.
right,
They have hardened their hearts, and they have gotten tough skin so that they can endure the
right,
cuts that you're talking about.
right,
And so I don't care becomes a shield.
right, right.
When you see a child that is in the I don't care realm, they have just crossed over to discouragement. And that I don't care,
Mm,
it can even lead to suicidality or even
wow.
homicide or joining a gang or
Right.
stealing, robbing houses. That's
Right.
the mentality of I don't care
Right.
can be replaced with I have been exasperated, I have been provoked to wrath, and I'm discouraged.
Right. Oh, oh, and that's very interesting because it's funny where the Bible talks about where Jesus says he has come to heal the brokenhearted,
Yeah.
and it sounds to me that the father can have such an impact on the child where you can cause fragmentation of the mind,
Right.
and having caused fragmentation of the
Right.
mind, when God made us, he made us whole body, mind, and spirit.
Right.
And the challenge and the problem is because life, the way life is now, because of the result of sin,
Right.
the way life is now, we are now susceptible to mind fragmentation, and
Absolutely.
and that will come based on our interactions. But the main interaction, I think that the especially a child, the first interaction is their interaction with their parents. That's how they
Right.
get the view of life.
Right.
So if a father is disrupted in his life and his viewpoint is disrupted, he can cause much fragmentation, or he can start the fragmentation process
Right.
within the mind of his child.
Right.
And a child that has a fragmented mind or a broken mind or a broken heart,
Mhm.
it leads to all kind of these other variables, these things that you have mentioned,
Right.
which shows up in wrath, of disgruntledness, or of
Right.
unhappy, or not
Right.
satisfied.
Right.
And so, but the Father can create that. And but Jesus, it's very interesting how the Bible says that Jesus came to heal the brokenhearted. He
Right.
came to mend the
Right.
fragmented mind.